Every morning looked the same for him. Wake up at 6:30, shower, coffee, toast, and then the train. The 7:45 into the city. He'd been riding that same train for 3 years now, working as a software developer downtown. 3 years of the same routine, the same seat when he could get it, the same view of strangers pretending other strangers didn't exist. He liked it that way. Predictable, safe, no surprises. He always wore his headphones, even when nothing was playing. It was easier that way. People didn't try to talk to you when you had headphones on. They didn't ask you to move your bag or comment about the weather or try to sell you something. You could just exist in your own little bubble, floating through the morning without having to perform for anyone. That Monday started like any other. He found a window seat in the middle car, set his bag down, adjusted his headphones, and opened his phone to scroll through nothing in particular. The usual crowd filtered in. Business people with their pressed suits and tired eyes, students with oversized backpacks, a few shift workers heading home after a night's work. Then she got on. He noticed her immediately, though he tried not to. She had this presence about her, something calm but purposeful. She wore a long green cardigan that looked handmade, carried a worn leather bag over her shoulder, and held a travel mug in one hand. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely, and she moved through the car like she actually saw people instead of just navigating around obstacles. The train was maybe half full, plenty of empty seats, rows and rows of them. She sat down right next to him. He tensed immediately. This was wrong. Everyone knew the unspoken rules. You don't sit next to someone when there are empty rows available. You just don't. It's an invasion of personal space, a violation of the silent commuter code that keeps society functioning. He shifted slightly toward the window, making himself smaller, hoping she'd take the hint and move. She didn't. She simply settled into her seat, set her bag on her lap, and pulled out a journal with a cover that looked like it had seen better days. He waited for the noise. The phone call, the loud music bleeding through cheap earbuds, the attempt at small talk. That's usually why people broke the space rule, right? They wanted something. Attention, conversation, connection. But she just sat there, quiet. She opened her journal and started writing, her pen moving steadily across the page. Not typing on a phone, not staring at a screen. Actually writing with an actual pen like people used to do. Minutes passed. The train pulled away from the station, swaying gently as it picked up speed. He snuck a glance at her from the corner of his eye. She was completely absorbed in whatever she was writing, occasionally pausing to look out the window before continuing. There was something almost meditative about the way she moved, like she existed in her own peaceful bubble. Despite himself, he relaxed slightly. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. At least she wasn't trying to talk to him. The morning commute usually took 45 minutes. He spent most of it pretending to look at his phone while actually being hyper-aware of the person beside him. He could smell her perfume, something light and floral mixed with coffee. He could hear the scratch of her pen on paper, a sound that felt strangely intimate in the age of digital everything. Once her shoulder bumped his when the train took a sharp turn, and he nearly jumped out of his skin. When they reached his stop, he grabbed his bag and practically fled from the train, relieved to have his space back. The next morning he arrived at his usual time, found a different seat in a different part of the car. Problem solved. He'd avoid the whole situation entirely, except she found him again, walked right past multiple empty seats and sat down beside him like it was the most natural thing in the world. He wanted to say something, to ask her why she kept sitting next to him, to point out the 50 other available seats, but he couldn't. That would require actually speaking to a stranger, actually engaging, and that felt more uncomfortable than just enduring her presence. So he said nothing. Again, she pulled out her journal. Again, she wrote in peaceful silence. Again, he spent the entire commute being intensely aware of another human being existing in his carefully controlled personal space. This continued for days. Then a week. Then 2 weeks. No matter where he sat, she found him. It started to feel less like coincidence and more like she was specifically choosing to sit beside him. But why? He wasn't anything special. Just another tired person trying to get through the day. He started noticing small things about her. The way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking. The silver bracelet on her wrist that made a soft jingling sound when she moved. The fact that she alternated between writing and sketching in her journal. Sometimes she'd read books, always poetry or philosophy. always with pages that looked like they'd been turned 1,000 times. She carried the same travel mug every day, and it had a small dent on one side. She wore a different cardigan each day, all of them looking handmade in various colors. She had a habit of tucking loose strands of hair behind her ear when she was focused, and she smiled sometimes, just slightly, like she'd thought of something pleasant. 3 weeks in, something shifted in him. He stopped feeling invaded by her presence and started feeling oddly comforted by it. She became part of his routine, like his morning coffee or his favorite seat. He found himself looking for her when he boarded the train, feeling a strange disappointment on the rare mornings when she wasn't there. He realized she never talked on the phone, never bothered him, never even looked at him, really. She just existed beside him in her own world, creating this bubble of calm that somehow included him without demanding anything from him. It was the strangest relationship he'd ever had. They'd never spoken a single word to each other, didn't know each other's names, probably wouldn't recognize each other in different clothes. Yet she'd become the most consistent presence in his life, the person he saw every single day, the person he'd started to depend on without even realizing it. One morning he found himself actually moving his bag, so she'd have more room when she sat down. She glanced at him, just briefly, and gave the smallest nod of acknowledgement. That tiny gesture felt monumental. Recognition. She saw him too. He wondered about her constantly. Where was she going every day? What did she do? What was she writing in that journal? Did she have a family? Friends? Was she happy? Why did she always sit beside him? But he didn't ask. Asking would change everything. It would turn them from silent companions into something else, something that required conversation and effort and vulnerability. So he kept his questions to himself, stored them away like secrets, and just let himself enjoy this strange, comfortable silence they'd created together. He didn't know it yet, but that silence was about to save him in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The morning it happened, he'd slept badly. One of those nights where you wake up every hour, checking the clock, calculating how much sleep you'd get if you fell asleep right now. By the time his alarm went off, he felt like he'd been awake all night. He had a presentation at work. A big one. The kind that could change things for him, move him up, or keep him stuck where he was. He'd been preparing for weeks, but suddenly it all felt wrong. Like the words would disappear the moment he stood up to speak. Like everyone would see right through him and realize he had no idea what he was doing. His hands shook while making coffee. He burned his toast, forgot his lunch on the counter. Everything felt wrong, slightly off, like the world had tilted just enough to throw him off balance. On the train, he sat in their usual spot. She arrived moments later, settling beside him like always. He barely registered her presence. His mind was racing, running through his presentation, finding every possible flaw, every way it could go wrong. His knee started bouncing. Fast, nervous, unable to stop. He could feel his breathing getting weird, short and shallow, like his lungs had forgotten how to work properly. His chest felt tight. The train car felt too hot, too crowded, too small. He needed air. He needed to get out. But they were underground now, moving through the tunnel, trapped until the next station. The panic was building. He recognized it from past experiences, knew what was coming. His heart pounded harder. His vision started to narrow at the edges. Thoughts spiraled, each one worse than the last. You're going to mess up. Everyone will see you fail. You can't do this. You've never been able to do this. His breathing got faster. He gripped the edge of his seat, trying to ground himself, but it wasn't working. The familiar voice of anxiety screamed louder and louder in his head. Then something appeared in his field of vision. Her journal. She'd placed it on his lap, open to a specific page. He blinked, trying to focus on it through the panic haze. There was a drawing. Simple but beautiful. A large tree with massive, spreading roots that went deep into the ground. The trunk was strong, the branches reaching upward, but it was the roots that caught his attention. They looked unshakable, permanent, safe. Below the drawing, in neat handwriting, were 4 simple words. Panic passes. Roots hold. He stared at those words. Read them again. And again. His breathing was still fast, but something about seeing them written down, something about the image of those deep roots, started to cut through the noise in his head. Panic passes. It does, he knew that. He'd survived every panic attack he'd ever had. They felt endless in the moment, but they always passed. Always. Roots hold. He imagined himself as that tree. Imagined having roots that deep, that strong. imagined being grounded even when the storm hit. His breathing slowed. Just a little, then a little more. He focused on the drawing on those roots, on the simple truth written beneath them. His hands unclenched from the seat. His vision widened. The crushing weight on his chest eased. He sat there for several minutes just breathing and looking at that drawing. Slowly the panic receded, not gone completely but manageable, survivable. He became aware of his surroundings again. The train was still moving. People around him were lost in their own worlds, unaware that he'd just been drowning moments ago. And beside him she sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, giving him space but staying present. He looked at her then. Really looked at her for the first time. She wasn't looking at him, wasn't hovering or asking if he was okay or making a big deal of what had just happened. She just sat there calm and steady, like those roots in her drawing. How did she know? How did she understand exactly what he needed in that moment? The train reached his stop. He carefully closed her journal and handed it back to her. Their hands touched briefly during the exchange, and he forced himself to speak, his voice rough. "Thank you." 2 words. The first words they'd ever spoken to each other. They felt enormous. She looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were kind, understanding in a way that made him feel exposed and safe all at once. "You're welcome," she said softly, and her voice was exactly what he'd imagined, gentle but sure. Then she smiled, and it wasn't a pitying smile or a worried smile. It was a smile that said, "I see you, I understand, and you're going to be okay." He got off the train feeling lighter than he had all morning. The presentation still loomed ahead, but it didn't feel quite as impossible anymore. Panic passes. Roots hold. That night he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She'd seen him. Not just his physical presence, but his struggle. She'd noticed his anxiety, recognized a panic attack starting, and had known exactly how to help without making him feel weak or broken. Nobody had ever done that before. Usually people either didn't notice or got uncomfortable and looked away. But she'd leaned in, quietly, without fanfare, but she'd helped him. The next morning he did something he never did. He stopped at the coffee shop in the station and bought 2 coffees. 1 black for him, 1 with cream, no sugar, because he'd noticed that's how she drank it based on watching her at the train station cafe. When he boarded the train, she was already there. He sat down beside her and held out one of the cups. "For you," he said simply. She looked surprised for just a moment. Then that gentle smile appeared again. She took the coffee, wrapping her hands around it. "Perfect. Thank you." They didn't talk more that morning. Didn't need to. But something had shifted between them. An acknowledgement. A connection. They weren't just 2 strangers sharing space anymore. They were 2 people who saw each other. Over the next few days, their silent routine changed. Small things. He started bringing 2 coffees regularly. She brought him a bookmark one day, handmade with pressed flowers inside clear resin. He brought her a chocolate croissant after noticing her eyeing them at the station bakery. She left the newspaper crossword on his seat, partially completed, a silent invitation to finish it. They were communicating without words, but saying so much. Each small gesture carried meaning. "I see you. I remember. I care that you exist." He realized one morning that he was happier. The weight he'd carried for so long felt lighter. That constant anxiety that hummed in the background of his life had quieted to a manageable whisper. Not because anything had changed in his circumstances, but because she was there. This person who understood him without needing explanations, who didn't require him to be anything other than himself. He started to wonder about her life beyond these morning commutes. Where did she go every day? What did she do that made her so observant, so attuned to other people's struggles? And why him? Why had she chosen to sit beside him day after day until this quiet connection formed? But he still didn't ask. Maybe because he was afraid of the answer. Maybe because some part of him wanted to keep this thing between them undefined and simple. Once you started asking questions, once you brought words into it, everything got complicated. So they continued their silent dance. Coffee and chocolate. Borrowed pens and shared newspapers. Comfortable silence that felt fuller than most people's conversations. And he was content with that, or at least he told himself he was. He didn't know that everything was about to change. That silence, no matter how comfortable, couldn't last forever. Monday morning. He walked to their usual spot. 2 coffees in hand, expecting to see her already seated by the window. Her seat was empty. He sat down, set both coffees on the small ledge by the window, and waited. Maybe she was running late. The train doors stayed open for another 2 minutes. Passengers filed in, found their seats, settled in. She didn't appear. The doors closed. The train pulled away from the station. He stared at the empty seat beside him, at the extra coffee growing cold in his hand. It felt wrong. Like showing up to your house and finding the furniture gone. She'd been there every single day for months now. Every single day. She didn't just miss the train. That wasn't something she did. He tried to focus on his phone, on work emails, on anything else. But his eyes kept drifting to that empty space beside him. The spot where she should be, Tuesday, no sign of her. He bought 2 coffees anyway, just in case. Poured one out at the station trash can when she didn't show, Wednesday, empty seat. Empty morning. He realized how much of his day had started to revolve around those quiet moments with her. Without them, everything felt slightly off. Colors less bright. Time moving wrong. He caught himself looking for her everywhere. On the platform, in the crowd, walking past the station windows. His brain kept insisting he saw her, only to focus and realize it was someone else entirely. Someone with similar hair or the same color cardigan or just the same general shape moving through space. Thursday morning, he didn't buy the second coffee. What was the point? She was gone. Maybe she'd changed jobs. Maybe she'd moved. Maybe she'd simply decided she was done with her weird routine of sitting next to a stranger every day. People change their minds. Lives moved on. That was normal, but it didn't feel normal. It felt like losing something he hadn't realized he needed until it was gone. He spent the commute staring out the window, watching the city blur past. He thought about all the things he'd never asked her. Her name, where she worked, what she wrote in that journal every morning. Whether she had family nearby, if she liked movies or music or art. Basic things that people normally knew about each other. They'd built this entire silent relationship, and he knew almost nothing concrete about her. Just feelings, impressions, the sense that she understood him better than people who'd known him for years. Friday. Still gone. He got on the train feeling defeated. Found a different seat this time, by the door instead of the window. Maybe it was time to let go of the routine. Start fresh. Stop waiting for someone who clearly wasn't coming back. The train started moving. He closed his eyes, trying to shake off the strange grief that had settled over him. Over a commute companion. Over someone he'd barely spoken to. It was ridiculous. Then he felt someone sit down beside him, his eyes snapped open. She was there. Real. Solid. Actually there. Relief flooded through him, so intense it almost hurt. He wanted to say something, but the words tangled up in his throat. She looked tired. More than tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she held herself differently. Smaller. Like she was carrying something heavy. They sat in silence, but it wasn't their usual comfortable silence. This one felt fragile, breakable. He couldn't help it. The words came out before he could stop them. "Are you okay?" She turned to look at him, and he saw the answer in her eyes before she spoke. No, she wasn't okay. "I've been at the hospital," she said quietly. "My younger brother. He's been struggling with depression for a while, but this week was really bad. I stayed with him." Something cracked open in his chest. She'd been dealing with something real and heavy and painful, and here he'd been selfishly missing her presence on his commute. "I'm sorry," he said. "Is he okay now?" She nodded slowly. "Better. Not great, but better. He's staying with me for a while. We're figuring it out." The train rocked gently as it moved through a turn. He searched for the right words and couldn't find them. What do you say to someone who's hurting? Someone you care about but barely know? "I'm glad you're back," he finally said. Simple, true. She smiled a little at that. A sad smile, but genuine. "Me too, I miss this. These mornings. They've become important to me." "Yeah," he agreed. "Same." They fell quiet again, but after a moment she started talking. Really talking. She told him about her brother, about watching him struggle and not knowing how to help, about feeling helpless and scared and guilty that she hadn't seen the signs sooner. He listened. Really listened. And when she paused, he found himself sharing too. About his own anxiety, about the panic attacks that had plagued him for years, about how isolated he felt, how hard it was to connect with people when your brain constantly told you that you were too much. Too broken, too difficult. That's why I started sitting next to you, she admitted. That first day I saw you get on the train and you reminded me of my brother. That same look. Like you were trying so hard to hold everything together, to be invisible, to just get through the day without breaking. I thought maybe if I just sat nearby, if I was just present without demanding anything, it might help. The way I wished someone would do for him. His throat tightened. All this time he'd thought she was invading his space, bothering him, not understanding boundaries. But she'd been offering him exactly what he needed, even when he didn't know he needed it. It did help, he said. More than you know. I don't get panic attacks as often anymore, and when I do, I think about that drawing. The roots. It works. Good, she said. That's good. They talked through 3 stops. 4. 5. He completely missed his station and he didn't care. They were actually talking now, actually sharing, and it felt like something precious and terrifying all at once. They ended up getting off together at a random stop, finding a small diner on the corner, ordering breakfast neither of them was particularly hungry for. The conversation flowed easier than he'd expected. Not easier than their silence had been, but different, richer, fuller. She told him she was an art therapist working with kids who'd experienced trauma. That explained so much. The journal, the drawing, the way she seemed to understand unspoken pain. He told her about his work, about growing up moving constantly because of his dad's job, never having time to put down roots anywhere. About how that had shaped him, made him afraid of connection because it always felt temporary. Everyone leaves eventually, he heard himself say, so it's easier to not let them get close in the first place. She looked at him with those understanding eyes. But that's lonely. Yeah, he admitted. It really is. They sat in that diner for 2 hours. Talked about everything and nothing. He learned her favorite color was green. She learned he was terrified of dogs because of a childhood incident. She liked old jazz music. He liked cooking but never did it for himself. She had 3 sisters. He was an only child who'd always wanted siblings. When they finally left, standing on the sidewalk outside, there was an awkward moment. They'd crossed some invisible line. They weren't silent commute companions anymore. They were people, real people with messy lives and struggles and hopes. Same time Monday? She asked. Yeah, he said. Same time. They went their separate ways, but everything felt different now. The silence between them had broken, and he didn't know if that was good or terrifying or both. Over the next few weeks, their morning commutes transformed completely. They talked. Not constantly, but regularly, sharing pieces of their lives, their days, their thoughts. Sometimes they'd go several stops in comfortable quiet. Then one of them would mention something small, and a whole conversation would unfold. He learned that she took her coffee with cream because her grandmother always made it that way. That she'd wanted to be a painter, but switched to art therapy after seeing how much it helped her brother. That she was afraid of heights but loved rooftop restaurants anyway. Small details that made her real, 3-dimensional, human. She learned he'd taught himself to code by watching free videos online, that he stress-baked at night and brought the results to work, that he had a playlist of rain sounds he listened to when he couldn't sleep, little pieces of him that he'd never shared with anyone before. They started meeting outside the train, coffee on Saturday mornings at a place she loved, a museum on a random Tuesday evening when they both left work early, late-night diner meals after particularly hard days. He found himself thinking about her constantly, wondering what she'd think about something he'd seen, wanting to text her a photo or a joke, checking his phone hoping to see her name light up the screen. It was new and exciting and absolutely terrifying, because this was exactly what he'd been avoiding his entire adult life, getting close, letting someone in, becoming vulnerable. He'd built such careful walls around himself, and she'd somehow slipped past all of them without him noticing until it was too late. She saw him now, really saw him. Not just the anxiety and the struggle, but everything. His habits and quirks. His fears and hopes. The weird way he organized his apps alphabetically. How he always ordered the same thing at restaurants because trying something new felt risky. The fact that he called his mom every Sunday but rarely had much to say. And that visibility felt dangerous. Because what if she decided he was too much work? Too complicated? Too broken? Everyone left eventually. That's what he knew. That's what experience had taught him. He started pulling back without meaning to. Small things at first. Taking the earlier train some mornings. Responding to texts a little slower. making excuses about being busy when she suggested meeting up. Building those walls back up brick by careful brick, she noticed. Of course she noticed. She was trained to notice. One morning, after he'd missed 3 commutes in a row, she texted him, "Are you okay? I miss our mornings." His finger hovered over the keyboard. He could lie, say work was crazy, say he'd been sick, make it easy and clean and safe. Instead, he told the truth. "I'm scared." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Of what? This, us, getting close to someone. It never works out for me. He watched the screen, heart pounding. This was it. The moment where she'd realize he was too much work and back away. Better now than later, right? Better before he fell completely. Her response came through. "Can we talk? In person?" They met at the diner. Their spot now, though neither of them had said it out loud. She was already there when he arrived. 2 cups of coffee on the table. He sat down across from her, couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Talk to me," she said gently. "What's going on?" The words spilled out, all of it. How he was terrified of caring about someone because caring meant loss. How every friend he'd made as a kid had eventually moved away or moved on. How his longest relationship had lasted 6 months before she'd told him he was too anxious, too much work, too exhausting to be around. How he'd decided after that it was easier to just be alone, safer, less painful. "And then you showed up," he said. "You just sat down next to me and refused to leave, and I tried so hard not to care, but I do. I care so much it scares me. Because when you leave, and you will leave because everyone does, it's going to hurt worse than anything before." She let him finish. Didn't interrupt. Didn't tell him he was being ridiculous or overthinking. She just listened. When he finally ran out of words, she reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "But I need you to hear me. Really hear me. I'm choosing to be here. Every day. I'm choosing you. But you have to let me. You have to stop deciding for both of us that this won't work. But what if it doesn't? What if I mess it up? What if my anxiety gets worse again? What if I'm too much? Then we figure it out," she said simply. "Together." That's what people do. They don't run away the first time things get hard. He looked at her finally. Really looked. She wasn't running. She was sitting right there holding his hand, choosing to stay. "I started seeing a therapist," he admitted. "After you suggested it. She's been helping. But she said something last week that keeps replaying in my head." "What's that?" "She asked me what if being truly known is actually the safest thing of all. What if letting someone see all of you, even the messy parts, is what creates real security instead of destroying it?" "Your therapist sounds smart," she said with a small smile. Terrifying concept, though. The best things usually are. They sat there for a long time, hands linked across the table, coffee growing cold. He felt something shift inside him. Not a switch flipping, but a gentle loosening, like a knot slowly being untied. "I don't know how to do this," he confessed. "I don't know how to be close to someone without waiting for them to leave." "You learn," she said. "We both learn. This is new for me too, you know. I'm used to taking care of people, to being the stable one. It's scary to need someone back. To let myself rely on another person." That surprised him. She always seemed so together, so calm and grounded. "You're scared too?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But I think the things worth having are always a little scary. And you're worth it." Those words settled into him, finding places he didn't know were empty. You're worth it. When was the last time someone had said that to him? When was the last time he'd believed it? "I don't want to push you away," he said. "I just don't know how to not be afraid." "So be afraid," she said. "But stay anyway. Be scared and let me in anyway. That's courage. Not the absence of fear, but doing the thing despite it." He thought about the drawing she'd shown him months ago, the tree with deep roots. Maybe that's what this was. Choosing to put down roots even when the ground felt unstable. Choosing to grow deeper instead of running to new soil. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, I'll try," she squeezed his hand. "That's all anyone can do." They left the diner together, walking slowly through the city streets. He didn't know what would happen. Didn't know if he could really change, really let someone in without self-destructing. But he knew he wanted to try. For her, for himself, for the possibility of something real. Monday morning, he stood on the platform at his usual time, watching the train approach. His heart did that familiar flutter, but it felt different now. Not anxiety, anticipation. The doors opened. He stepped inside. And there she was in their seat by the window, journal in her lap, looking up with a smile when she saw him. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough to feel her warmth, close enough to matter. For a moment they didn't speak, just sat there together, falling back into their comfortable rhythm. The train pulled away from the station and he felt himself breathe easier. "I brought you something," he said. From his bag he pulled out a small potted plant, a sapling barely 6 inches tall, its tiny leaves bright green and hopeful. "It's a maple," he explained. "They have really deep root systems. They're hardy, can survive almost anything once they're established. I thought—" He trailed off, suddenly feeling foolish. She took the plant carefully, cradling it in her hands like something precious. Her eyes were shining. "For when you need roots," he finished quietly. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." She set it carefully on her lap, then opened her journal to a page near the end. She turned it so he could see. Another drawing. This one showed 2 trees, separate but close. Above ground, their branches reached in different directions, but below the soil line, their roots intertwined, supporting each other, drawing from the same source. Above the drawing, she'd written, "Some people hear what we don't say. Those are our people." He felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, opening, like a door he'd kept locked for years finally swinging wide. "I don't need space," he said. "I thought I did. I thought pulling away would protect me, but it just made everything hurt worse. I don't want to run anymore." "Good," she said, "because I'm not letting you." They smiled at each other and it felt like relief, like coming home after a long journey to find everything exactly where it should be. The train moved through the city, carrying them forward like it always had. But nothing felt the same. He reached out and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. She squeezed back, and in that small gesture he felt an entire conversation. "I'm here. I see you. I choose this. I choose us. What are you thinking?" she asked after a while. "That I spent so long trying to be invisible," he said, "trying to take up as little space as possible, trying not to need anyone or let anyone need me. And then you sat down beside me and just refused to let me disappear. I saw you," she said simply. "From that first day, I saw someone worth knowing, worth sitting beside, even with all the anxiety, all the mess, especially with all that," she said. "That's the real stuff. That's what makes you human. I didn't want the perfect version you show the world. I wanted the real you." He thought about that. About being seen, truly seen and not rejected. About someone choosing to stay, not despite his flaws, but including them. About roots growing deep enough to weather storms. "I'm going to mess up sometimes," he warned. "I'm going to get scared and want to run. I'm going to have bad days where the anxiety wins." "I know," she said. "And I'm going to have days where my own stuff gets heavy. Days where taking care of everyone else catches up with me. We're both going to be imperfect. That's the deal. And we figure it out together." "Together," she confirmed. The train began to slow as it approached his stop. Their stop now. They'd discovered last week that they actually worked only 2 blocks apart. All these months of parallel lives, and they'd been that close the entire time. They gathered their things, stood up together. As they moved toward the doors, he kept hold of her hand. This small point of connection that had become essential. This person who'd taught him that being known wasn't dangerous. It was the whole point. They stepped off the train onto the platform. Morning commuters rushed past them, everyone lost in their own worlds, their own struggles, their own silent battles. He thought about all the invisible things people carried, all the pain and hope and fear that never got spoken out loud. And he thought about how lucky he was. That out of all these people, all these strangers passing each other every day, she'd chosen to see him, to sit beside him, to refuse to let him stay invisible. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked, like she always did now. "Same time tomorrow," he agreed. "And the day after that? And the day after that?" She laughed, and the sound made something warm bloom in his chest. "Big commitment." "Yeah," he said, meeting her eyes. "It is." They walked together toward the station exit, toward work, toward the rest of their day. But for the first time in his life, leaving didn't feel like an ending. Because he knew she'd be there tomorrow morning. In their seat. Waiting for him. Choosing him. Staying. He'd spent so long believing that being alone was safer, that walls protected you, that keeping people at a distance was the only way to avoid getting hurt. But she'd proven all of that wrong. Not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, just by sitting beside him, day after day, close enough to hear all the thoughts he didn't speak, close enough to understand, close enough to stay. And maybe that was what love looked like. Not perfect, not easy, just present, just choosing each other, just putting down roots even when the ground felt uncertain, just being brave enough to be known. They reached the street corner where they'd part ways, heading to their separate offices. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her, felt her heart beating against his chest. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For sitting beside me. For staying. For not letting me hide." She pulled back just enough to look at him, her hands on his face. "Thank you for letting me in. For being brave enough to try." They stood there on that busy corner, commuters flowing around them like water around stones. Two people who'd found each other in the most ordinary way possible. On a train. In the morning. Two strangers who'd become something more. He thought about the sapling in her bag. About roots growing deep. About choosing to stay planted even when everything in you wanted to run. About trusting that being known was actually the safest thing of all. And for the first time in his life, he believed it. Not because suddenly everything was easy. Not because his anxiety had disappeared or his fears had vanished. But because she was there. And she saw him. All of him. And she was staying anyway. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.